What are some of those small mistakes that you made that cost you 30,
Oh,
40%?
just one of the ways to actually make buy, rent, sell work is to increase the number of bedrooms in the property. And depending on the planning laws around where you live, that doesn't necessarily mean you need a planning approval. So in this house, I found a house with a really large living area, and there was room to create another bedroom and an ensuite bathroom. So that was great to increase the value. But the reno is a little bit more complex now. So just the way we renovated it, where we placed the stuff and the trades we used, straight away there's a lot of money I could have saved in hindsight in the way I did it. And a lot of it just comes down to that, better decisions around how you executed the reno. And one thing that's always fascinated me with trades is some of the best trades don't advertise, and they're not necessarily the most expensive either. I've worked with some guys, particularly when they're a little bit older, I've worked with some guys who just had an attitude that because they're older, they can't charge as much because they're not as quick as a young guy, which is probably fine if you're in a building site or something and they're cracking the whip. But from my perspective, you're older, you've got a lot of experience. Usually these guys have multiple different skills, different trades, and they could charge literally half of what someone else would charge who's just a bit better at marketing themselves and has that different, set point thing. People just charge how much they think they're worth rather than how much they are in the marketplace.
One of the big things that you mentioned there is picking a good builder. What are some of the things that we should be looking out for when it comes to selecting a builder, and what are some of the red flags that we could potentially be seeing out there?
Look, I think the biggest tip I could say is pick a builder that commonly builds what you're building so that you are their ideal client. It sounds obvious, but one thing that is hard with building is the vast majority of clients, when you look at your main builders, the vast majority of their clients are home builders. And home builders, what they're usually kind of price sensitive to a point, but they're also then really just wanting their dream or as much of it as they can afford. So you hit them with a 3-4 month delay on their build, they might not even notice that much, or they might whinge, but it's not really the end of the world for them. Developers are very different. We're very demanding that we want good quality, we want enough quality to meet what our target market wants, but we don't necessarily want much more, or maybe slightly more to stand out from the crowd. We want it as cheap as possible because every dollar saved is a dollar made, and we want it as quick as possible for the same reason. So dealing with a development-centric builder means that a lot of process is going to be much more focused to you. So think about something like pre-start with a builder, you go do your selections and so on. For a home buyer, that's a multi-day process and stressing about the colours they need, a lot of hand-holding. For a developer, often there'll be certain things I know about my target market that they need, and the rest of the selections are basically what's popular right now. Give me those. I don't need a very big range at all. So that's one big thing. If you get that right fit, then your builder should be starting off on the right foot. And then the second big thing is financial stability. And that's a very difficult thing to measure, and everyone's very aware of it at the moment because unfortunately builders are going broke, and it's not a big surprise as to why. I mean, if their input costs go up 20% per annum, which they have been in Perth, and I figure it's pretty similar in a lot of the other areas, their gross margin is only 20%. So they're making losses on builds, and how can they sustain that? You can ask for financial reports and things, but I just don't put any store in that, because I don't care what you were like at one point in time 12 months ago at the end of the financial year. I need to know how your solvency and cash flow is now. And the best way I found to look into that is think about their cash flow and their business structure. You need to know how many projects they've got on, what stage those projects are up to, and how many overheads they have, how many staff and lease. So, and then you can get a bit of a feel if they've got a good even spread of projects and if their net margin is 6%, then you can kind of figure out what kind of cash flow they might have coming in. And if it feels right, then good enough. But when you look at that, you'll find builders, the red flag is the builder that has heaps of jobs that are about to finish and hardly anything new starting.
Yeah.
So that's someone who's got a pending cash flow problem, and you don't want to be part of that.
So how do you identify that? Do you just ask how many projects are you working on, and how many have you got coming up? Is it that easy?
Yeah. When I met Good and he did the first build for me, I asked him, just can you tell me all the projects you got on? Where are they up to? What's their value? How much staff do you have? And I was up front. I said, I just want to get a bit of a sense for your cash flow. And one thing I will say, just because something might not seem right from the ideal, at least gives people a chance to explain. A new growing business won't have a great cash flow projection, but they might be able to show they've got heaps of cash reserves. And then just think about it commercially. So, okay, you've got these staff and these roles. You can just do a back the envelope calculation as to what their likely overheads are, and the total value of their build. So they're probably working on you need to know your market, but in Perth, they're probably working on about a 20% gross margin, 6% net. So that's a 14% between their net profit and gross. So is that enough to cover their staff and the rest of their stuff? Yes. Well, they're probably that's a fine business to jump in with.
One of the questions I have around WA is it a full is the state control all the plannings? Is it individual council have different planning regulations? How does it kind of work?
Great question. It's close to being state control, but there is local council involvement. So to explain that, there is something called the Residential Design Codes. They set out the residential development standards. I'm just talking about group dwellings here, townhouses and single houses. There is also a similar thing for apartments. And then each local council can then set the zoning under their local town planning scheme. And they can also create local planning policies, which can vary parts of the residential design code. But it's not a free-for-all, that has to be approved by a state government body called the West Australian Planning Commission. So they're not going to let them, there's got to be reasons for it. And often it's, the idea behind it is to make sure it's suitable it takes into account the nuances of different areas. So in the city, there's things like heritage and different, older suburbs have different streetscapes to new suburbs. But WA is a very, very big landmass. There's a lot of country towns. So, country towns can then have different things going on that much more relevant for them than, say, Perth, and regional cities like Gero, Bosso, Bunbury, Albany. They can brew. They can do different stuff as well. So,
super interesting.
It's one thing that's good with it is that the residential design codes state a minimum standard. So if you meet the minimum standard, then your planning gets approved, more or less. So that we go in with some certainty around what it is we can build. We don't get stuck with this idea of we think it's a 3-unit site, but it could be 5 or it could be 2. It's fairly prescriptive that way. So I quite enjoy working under that system.
Yeah, it's like minimum lot size for a subdivision is 450 square meters guaranteed. Like it's you can fit it on there.
To figure out if you can subdivide something, if you're knocking the house down, you probably don't even need a survey necessarily. You can just do the maths off the title. If you're keeping a house, you just need to see how much space is behind the house and whether there's enough room there to build the additional lots at a high level. So it's good. It means when we do our due diligence, we've got some pretty good certainty about the outcome we're going to get.
Question here: with builders folding and materials cost on the rise, how do you mitigate the risk here?
Yeah, that's a great question. So firstly, I've got my preferred builder, and he's a good friend of mine. I was in his office today. I can work out of his office. I know all his staff members. He encourages me to talk to them directly if it's relevant. So I know what his company's doing. So builder selection, crucial. Secondly, how you set up your project and your strategy to make sure if your builder fails, you're not going down too. So I've had a project where a builder went broke, and the biggest risk is that because you're building under this kind of resi build, you're doing stage payments, so you pay fixed amounts at certain milestones. For cash flow, the builder always has to be ahead. So when they invoice you, the amount for the work done is less than what you've paid. That's in a normal market. When the prices are going up, we've got some jobs where the builder's making a loss because the price went up so quickly. So if he went broke partway through and I go to a new builder, it means the cost to build is going to be higher, to finish is going to be higher than the net of what I paid versus what I had afterwards. So what that means is your bank's approved money for the loan. If your builder goes broke, you're going to have to tip in cash to get it finished. So you need to be very, make sure that you can keep the thing going. And all states have some form of insurance around this that is drawn when you build. So if the builder goes broke, the consumer has a level of protection. In WA, as long as you're building less than 4, this is why we only build, part of why we only build 2 or 3, you can be covered for up to $100,000 in cost overrun. So, yeah,
that's a little bit of protection there.
Yeah, well, these builds are higher end townhouse, about 500,000 each. So that's 25% buffer. And then the other thing, why we love to keep the houses and renovate them, is we add value pretty quickly and we subdivide and have individual titles. So if we got stuck and we didn't have the money, we can still sell a house if we haven't sold it, sell a block of land. We're not typically, if you think of the value curve of how much you spend on a development as you go and how much the property's worth, we don't spend a lot of time with the property being worth less than the amount we've spent because we've added value quickly in the renovation. That's probably a 10-minute thing to really explain what I mean by that, but maybe I'll just simplify it. Just think about what happens at what point is if your project ended, would you owe the most money compared to the lowest market value? And typically it's if you've knocked a house down, it would be lock up. When you get to lock up, that structure might be worth something. If you put it on the market, someone might pay you something for the land plus the structure. Before that, I don't think many people would. And so you've paid all this money to the builder that hasn't added any value. So yeah, that's your real danger point.
Have you ever returned a loss, and how does that work for people? So one of the things is capital risk. How do you get around that? Like, how does someone?
So I have not returned a loss, but that doesn't mean to say it can't happen, because the biggest thing outside of our control is the market. And I spend a lot of effort in being very selective about where I buy. But look at the last 3 years. COVID came along. No one knew about that. Interest rate rises. Yeah, we had a sense it would rise at some point, but who could say when, how quickly, or where it'll stop? And what does that even mean for your local market? Very different all over Australia for what that means. So what does that mean in my model? If we're sharing profits, we share downside risk as well. And this goes back to the art, though. This is how I like to structure it. And I was talking a second how there's other ways you could do it. In our model, remember I said that the cash guys get the biggest return, 55%? The reason for that is in our model they take the biggest risk, because if we lost money, the bank always gets repaid first. So the first thing that goes is the profit. The second thing that goes would be the capital, and then if you're at a point where you couldn't repay the bank, that's when the servicing guy might be on the hook. But really, if you're at that point, why would you want to sell the property? No one's getting anything. So risk mitigation comes into this as well, the strategy we pick and exit points and so on, which is a different discussion. So that's one way. I just want to do an alternative example just to demonstrate to people why this is an art, because we could have done this a bit differently. We could say, well, we won't do profit share at all. I will raise the money and do that as a loan. So Jeff, now instead of me giving you profit, I'm going to say, give me a 2-year loan and I'll pay you, where's bank interest at the moment? Maybe 8% per annum. That's a bit of a clip on top of the bank. And it's secured by caveat, say. So you've got some security there against the asset. And then Joe, as the servicing guy, I'll just pay you a flat fee. So that's all great. The risk is then more transferred onto me. So if I did the numbers that way, there'd be more profit left over that could be left to the skilled person. But you've then got that risk of making sure your development runs a bit slower and you're running out of time. Maybe you don't get it done in 2 years because COVID hit and things got delayed. In which case,
you probably got a penalty interest so on the in the heads of agreement or the JV agreement or whatever it's called, and then you have to pay the servicing partner more. And anyway, I'll let you.
And all of that can work fine. I know plenty of developers that do it that way, but for me, a lot of it just came down to that aligning. I wanted to align the return with the project so that no one comes into this. The problem if I go to someone and tell them that they're getting a loan and a fixed rate of return is a lot of people will think of that almost like a bank loan or something, and it's guaranteed and locked in, which it is. But what happens if something COVID was worse than it had, there was a different type of COVID. It was really bad this time and killed heaps of people, and property actually did drop 30% like the doomsayers were saying. And suddenly I can't actually repay the loan because there's no equity in the thing and no one's getting their fee. It's just a personal preference for me that I wanted to line it more up with the project itself. So everyone goes in with their eyes open and we're all working to the same basis, which I found's worked pretty well. When unexpected stuff has happened, everyone's been on the same page. It hasn't been too hard to work your way through it.
But this will be the last question, and it goes to David. He is a regular viewer and a great supporter. So I love your support, Dave. Keep going. So he just says, how do you get resi lending instead of development lending? Do you delay there's 2 questions there. So resi, I can probably answer this one, but resi lending, you basically just have to keep it under a certain number, I imagine, isn't it? Like if you go over, it goes into
look, I'm certainly no broker, but the key for us has been the type of property and the number we build. And it only falls in with some lenders, but that's why I work with a broker. He knows who they are. The second part around GST, this is a good question. Any form of value add, renovation, subdivision, development, talk to your accountant and get the advice, because you're likely to pay GST and capital gains tax if it's in your own name and so on, right? And my view with tax, I know there's ways to do things in your own name and try and string that along. I think, let's face it, you're making money, expect to pay tax. I like to sail down the middle road. I don't want to be on the bleeding edge because I don't want to suddenly find out the ATO wants me to pay my whole heap of money. And for us in developing, we're creating a new product. We're paying GST. We're not trying to dodge that at all. We pay the GST and we claim the credits as appropriate. We do our BAS with our bookkeepers, and it's all black and white. So if the ATO ever came to audit us, we should be pretty close, and we don't have any problems.
And you're probably doing the GST claiming on a quarterly rather than annual basis, I imagine.
Yeah, that's right. You could even do it monthly. We don't bother with that, but quarterly is a good level for us. Yeah.
How many developers do you? Oh, sorry. How many developers do you see that don't claim the GST credits? Or
Surely all of them do.
Okay. So I'm not an accountant, so you check this yourself. But a lot of this also comes down to intention. So if you were going to hold, then I know one person who holds the stuff for longer term, so she won't claim the GST. But if you hold for long enough, you won't pay GST on the sale. So that's why she won't claim the GST when she builds, because she intends to hold for long enough not to pay it on the sale. Because you wouldn't want to. You may, if you can't double dip, right? If the ATO would ask you to pay it back, and they ask you to pay interest on the lost years that they didn't have that money.
Yeah.